He ruled the world of tech with a single tap. But the moment he saw her soaked, trembling, and pressing her lifeless baby to her chest on a crowded sidewalk, time stopped. She didn't beg for a handout. She begged for hope. And in that frozen second, the cold billionaire known for firing hundreds without flinching, knelt down and broke. He was supposed to be on his way to the most important meeting of his life. Nathan Hale stepped out of the black SUV, the city around him spinning in its usual blur of noise and motion. Manhattan's rhythm rarely paused. Horns, hurried heels on wet pavement, the occasional sharp laughter of people untouched by the day's cold drizzle. Nathan didn't notice the weather. He rarely noticed anything that didn't affect his bottom line. His phone buzzed for the third time in under a minute. He glanced at the screen. Board of Directors, Zoom, 9:30 a.m. sharp. He was already behind. A young assistant hovered nearby with an umbrella, her voice cutting through the buzz. "Mr. Hale, your notes are in the folder. The board will be waiting. And sir, your tie." Nathan adjusted it without a word. He didn't do small talk. He didn't do interruptions. But something small, something fragile, tugged at the edges of his razor-sharp focus. A sound. No, not a sound. A cry, a plea. He turned his head. Just one glance. That's all it was supposed to be. But what he saw froze him. There, at the corner of Lexington and 51st, in the middle of a streaming crowd of people with places to be, was a young woman, soaked through from the rain, kneeling on the sidewalk, cradling something wrapped in a thin, wet blanket. Her shoulders shook not from the cold, but from sobs that came from a place deeper than desperation. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't panicking in the way he'd seen others break down. Her voice barely rose above the noise, but it was clear, raw, almost sacred in its urgency. "Please, please, help my baby." Nathan's chest tightened. The words pierced through traffic, through the meetings and the noise, through the carefully built walls around his own heart. Her hair stuck to her face. Her dress was too thin for the weather. Her hands trembled as she held a tiny bundle against her chest, shielding it from the wind as best she could. And the baby, he could barely see its face, wasn't crying. That was the most alarming part. No sound, no movement. The assistant beside him looked, frowned, then whispered, "Should we call someone? Maybe security?" But Nathan was already walking toward her. She didn't look up when his shoes stopped inches from the wet sidewalk. She kept whispering to the baby, rocking gently, as if trying to will life back into his small body. I don't know what to do," she stammered through chattering teeth. "I went to the clinic, but they were closed. I don't have insurance. I don't have." Her voice cracked. "I don't have anything." Nathan crouched. A strange sight, a man worth nearly $12 billion in a handmade Italian suit, kneeling in the puddles of a city street. "What's his name?" he asked softly. The woman finally looked up. Her eyes were glassy, rimmed with red, but there was strength in them, to something fierce, something unyielding even in complete vulnerability. "Liam," she whispered. "He's 3 months. He stopped breathing. Please, I can't lose him." Nathan didn't hesitate. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around the woman's shaking shoulders. Then he turned, barked into his Bluetooth earpiece with a voice that left no room for questions. "Get Dr. Avery. Med team. 5 minutes. Bring the jet kit." Location pinged. The assistant stared. "Mr. Hallier meeting." He didn't answer. He gently reached for the baby. "May I?" he asked the mother. Her hands hovered protectively for a split second before she nodded and let him help. Nathan held the tiny boy against his chest, gently feeling for movement, for warmth, for breath. Nothing. Liam was still alive. Faint, but alive. "Hang on, little guy," Nathan whispered, his voice breaking in a way he hadn't felt in years. The ambulance sirens hadn't started yet. No help had arrived. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the $1 billion deal, not the waiting boardroom, not even the empire he'd spent 20 years building. This mattered. This tiny, fragile life mattered more than any merger or market. And the mother, this stranger, who had asked for nothing but a chance, had somehow reached a part of him no one had touched in decades. As the private med team arrived minutes later and gently took the baby into care, Nathan didn't step back. He climbed into the ambulance without a second thought. Rachel clutching his arm with tear-streaked gratitude. He didn't even glance back at the office tower behind him. The door shut, and with it, a new chapter in his life began, one that would cost him more than money, but give him something he never knew he needed. something even the richest man alive couldn't buy. Asterisk. The ambulance lights flickered silently through the misted glass as they sped toward the private medical wing. Rachel sat across from Nathan, still holding onto his coat wrapped around her shoulders, still gripping the corner of the stretcher where baby Liam lay. Her fingers wouldn't stop shaking, and her mind couldn't make sense of any of this. One moment she was invisible, just another tired mother in soaked shoes being ignored by the world. The next, this man, this stranger had swept into her nightmare like it mattered to him, like she mattered. "Who are you?" she finally whispered. Nathan didn't look away from Liam. "No one important right now," he said, his voice quiet. "He is." Rachel swallowed hard. "I couldn't even get the clinic to see him. They looked at my address and said I needed paperwork, but I don't have." Her voice cracked. "I just needed someone to see him." Nathan nodded slowly. "They will now." The baby's breathing had stabilized, but it was shallow, too shallow. The medic hovered beside them, checking monitors and oxygen flow with precise movements. Nathan's jaw clenched each time the heart monitor blipped, just a little too slowly. "I've seen numbers move faster than that," he muttered under his breath. "They don't scare me, but this scares me." Rachel glanced at him. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." "I didn't need to." His eyes never left Liam's face. "You asked for help. That's enough." The ambulance rolled to a stop outside a quiet side entrance to a private medical center. Not a city hospital. This place had no waiting rooms, no overbooked clinics, no blaring TVs, just silent corridors and a team of professionals already waiting. Nathan had called them mid-ride, the same team that handled tech tycoons and foreign diplomats, now stood ready for a baby who didn't have insurance. As Liam was wheeled away, Rachel stood frozen on the curb, soaked and speechless. Nathan gently touched her elbow. "Come on, you need to warm up, and I need answers." Inside the center, a nurse handed Rachel a warm robe and led her to a quiet room. Tea appeared in her hands without her asking. A soft blanket was draped over her shoulders. It had been so long since anyone cared enough to offer her comfort that she didn't know how to accept it. Nathan stood by the window, phone in hand, ignoring the stream of missed calls and urgent messages. "The board wants you now. They're voting without you." He silenced it. Rachel sipped her tea, her voice barely audible. "I was working 2 jobs. I was making it work. But then Liam got sick, and I had to choose. Miss work or Mrs. Doctor's visit. I chose him. My boss didn't. That's when I lost everything." Nathan turned. "You were let go for choosing your child." She nodded. "No call. Just removed from the schedule. I couldn't pay rent. They gave me 2 days to get out. I packed everything I had in a backpack. I thought I could stay at a shelter, but they were full. Then last night, Liam started coughing. It got worse. By morning, he wouldn't open his eyes. I walked 10 blocks to the clinic. They wouldn't even look at him." Nathan's eyes darkened not with anger, but with something heavier, guilt, reflection. How many systems like that had he built? How many decisions had he made that made life harder for someone like her? "I'm sorry," he said, and for once, he meant it. Rachel looked up. "Why? You didn't do any of that." He walked toward her, slowly, maybe not directly. "But I built a world where it happens every day. I called it efficiency. I called it business. But now, I'm not so sure anymore." Before she could respond, a doctor entered. "Baby Liam is stable," she said gently. "He's responding to treatment. We're monitoring for pneumonia, but he's breathing better now. You got him here just in time." Rachel broke into tears, not the desperate, fearful sobs from before, but the kind that come when fear finally loosens its grip. Relief, trembling gratitude. She turned to Nathan. "Thank you. You didn't have to, but you did." He gave a small smile. "I think I did have to." For a moment, the world slowed. There was no billion-dollar company, no closing stock prices, just a quiet hospital room, a fragile baby in recovery, and 2 people who never should have crossed paths, but somehow did. Nathan's phone buzzed again. He finally answered it, only to hear a furious voice shouting across the line, "You've missed the acquisition. They've pulled out. We lost the deal. Do you know what that cost us?" Nathan looked out the window again, the city glittering in the distance. He pressed the phone to his ear and answered calmly, "Yeah, I know exactly what it cost." Then he hung up. Rachel stared at him, stunned. Was that important? He shrugged lightly. "Depends how you define important." And in that moment, Rachel realized something that would stay with her forever. He hadn't just saved her baby, he was changing something inside himself, too. Not because he had to, but because something in her quiet, desperate plea had reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Humanity, compassion. And that, sometimes, the most important things in life are the ones you can't put a price on. The hospital room was still, except for the gentle rhythm of the monitor tracking Liam's breath. Rachel sat at his side, one hand gently resting over his tiny fingers. Every rise and fall of his chest felt like a miracle. She hadn't slept, not really, but for the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid to close her eyes. The storm that had followed her relentless and cruel had paused, even if just for one night. She glanced toward the window, where the early light painted the sky in soft streaks of blue and gold. Across the hall, Nathan sat in a small waiting room, staring at his untouched coffee. He'd spent most of the night there, refusing the offer to go home. His custom-tailored shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were tired, but he looked more at peace than he had in years. He wasn't used to silence. Normally, his mornings began with numbers, earnings reports, stock updates, international calls at 5 a.m. But this morning, the only numbers that mattered were on a heart monitor in a room down the hall. He looked up as a nurse entered. "She's awake," she said with a smile. "You can go in." Nathan hesitated. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. She's asking about you." He stood slowly, almost unsure of his next step. Something about this felt unfamiliar, vulnerable, and yet, he walked through the door. Rachel looked up when he entered, eyes tired, but kind. He stayed. He nodded. Didn't feel right to leave. She glanced down at Liam, now sleeping peacefully. "They say he's improving. They're still watching for infection, but they're hopeful." Nathan's voice was quiet. "Good. He's a fighter." There was a pause between them. Not awkward, just full. Rachel finally spoke again. "I still don't understand why you did it. Not just the hospital, or calling your doctors. You missed your meeting. I heard you on the phone. You lost something, didn't you?" Nathan gave a small, rueful smile and sat beside her. "I lost a company I was about to acquire. 18 months of negotiations, hundreds of hours, gone." Rachel blinked. "And you're not mad?" He looked at her, and his voice was almost a whisper. "I've walked away from people who needed help before, Rachel, not directly, not like this. But I knew what would happen when we cut jobs to improve stock value, when we closed regional offices and pulled funding from community clinics. It was numbers on paper to me, but it was life or death to someone else." Rachel studied him. "You didn't seem like someone who regrets anything." "I didn't," he admitted, "until I saw you on that sidewalk." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You asked me yesterday who I was. I've built companies, bought islands, and had my face on magazine covers, but none of that ever made me feel like I mattered. Not really. Not the way I felt holding your son in that ambulance." Rachel's throat tightened. "You mattered to me." To him. He looked up, startled by the words. She wasn't trying to flatter him. She wasn't trying to win him over. She was simply telling the truth, and that shook something in him more deeply than he expected. They sat in silence for a moment, the beeping of the monitor grounding them both. Then Rachel said something he didn't see coming. "You could have just paid the bill and walked away. Most rich people would have, but you didn't. You stayed. That means something." Nathan leaned back in the chair. "I didn't want to be just another checkbook in your story. I wanted to be part of the reason it changed." Her voice softened. "It already has." Outside the window, the sun broke fully through the clouds. Light streamed into the room, touching Liam's blanket, brushing across Nathan's hand. He looked down at the baby, then at Rachel. "What happens now?" he asked. She let out a slow breath. "We take it one day at a time. I still don't have a place to stay. I still don't have a job, but I have my son, and right now, that's enough." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. She hesitated. "What's that?" "A job offer," he said simply. "Not charity, not pity. A real position. My foundation. We fund educational and healthcare outreach programs across the country, but we need someone who understands struggle. Someone who knows what it means to fight for every breath." Rachel blinked in disbelief. "You'd trust me with something like that?" "I've trusted people with a lot more who cared a lot less." Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. Not because of the money or the opportunity, but because for the first time in forever, someone believed in her. A man who had spent his life surrounded by power and wealth had just handed her something far more rare. A chance. She smiled through tears. You don't even know me. Nathan stood and gave a soft smile. I'm getting too. And as he stepped out of the room to give her time with her son, Rachel looked down at Liam, asleep and warm. Life hadn't suddenly become perfect, but something had changed. The world had seen her. He had seen her. And maybe, just maybe, everything was about to begin again. Nathan sat alone in the back seat of his town car, the city moving past the windows like a blur of forgotten priorities. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him, lighting up again and again with names he used to consider untouchable: investors, board members, even his father. But he didn't answer. Not yet. He stared down at a simple photograph on his screen. Not a stock chart or a headline. It was a photo the nurse had taken that morning, Rachel holding Liam, both of them smiling in soft morning light. It didn't belong on the cover of any magazine, but to Nathan, it was worth more than every feature ever written about him. He hadn't felt that way in years. Maybe ever. His driver glanced in the rearview mirror. Back to the penthouse, sir. Nathan hesitated, then shook his head. No, take me to the South District, 35th and Oak. The driver's eyes widened. Sir, that's not your usual route. I know. I need to see something. As the car moved into the less polished parts of the city, Nathan's thoughts drifted to the conversation with Rachel earlier that morning. You said your foundation needed someone who understands struggle, she'd said. What do you know about it? He hadn't answered then, but now he was ready, because once, a long time ago, he did know. Before the suits, before the power, before the billions, he had been a boy sitting alone in a crowded shelter hallway, waiting for his mother to come back with a blanket that never arrived. But he had buried that part of himself so deeply, it took the sight of a soaked woman begging to save her child to shake it loose. As the car rolled to a stop, Nathan stepped out into the quiet gray of the neighborhood. Everything looked smaller. Then he remembered. The playground was rusted, the benches cracked, but the smell of the air thick with cooking oil and exhaust was exactly the same. He stood still for a moment, absorbing it all. Then, slowly, he walked toward the old brick building on the corner. It had once been a shelter. Now it was shuttered. The windows were boarded. The sign faded. A for-lease notice flapped in the breeze. Nathan stood before it for a long time. Not everything in life was meant to last forever, but some things deserved to begin again. Back at the hospital, Rachel sat in the quiet room beside Liam, reviewing the envelope Nathan had given her. She still couldn't quite believe it. There were real forms, a job description, a salary, health insurance, a note handwritten at the bottom. You don't need to prove yourself. You already have. Tears gathered in her eyes again, but this time they didn't fall. They settled, warm, grounding. She glanced at Liam, sleeping soundly, and felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Hope, not the fragile, whispered kind you hold on to in the dark. This was different. It had roots. It felt real. A soft knock came at the door. A nurse peeked in. There's someone here to see you. Rachel's brows furrowed. Who? The nurse smiled. A woman. Says she's your mother. Rachel stood so quickly the blanket slid off her lap. Her heart pounded. She hadn't spoken to her mother in over a year, not since the last argument, the last slammed phone call, the last words they both regretted. When she stepped into the hallway, she saw her mother standing nervously by the wall, hands wringing the strap of her purse. I saw the news, her mother said softly. They said a billionaire saved your baby. I didn't believe it. But then I saw the picture, and I knew it was you. Rachel's throat tightened. You haven't called. I didn't know if you even, I didn't know how to. Her mother whispered. I was proud and stubborn, and I thought, if I gave you space, you'd be stronger for it. But I was wrong. I should have come when you needed me. Rachel didn't answer. She simply walked into her mother's arms and held her for a long, long time. Sometimes, the healing we need most doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people we once gave up on, and who find their way back. Later that day, Nathan returned to the hospital with something unexpected in his hand, a folder of blueprints. He stepped into the room and held it out. Rachel raised an eyebrow. What's this? He opened the folder, to reveal sketches, floor plans, renderings, a new shelter, he said. Staffed, funded, with housing for mothers and children. We're building it where the old one used to be. You're going to help lead it. Rachel stared at him, stunned. You're not serious. I've never been more serious in my life. She looked at the designs, then up at him. Why me? Because you know what it's like to stand in the rain with nothing, and because no one should have to go through what you did. Her voice trembled. You're not just changing my life, I know. And then he smiled, not the rehearsed kind, not the one he wore for cameras or CEOs, but a smile that came from something deeper. Rachel placed the folder on the table and stood, taking his hand. I still don't know where this is going, she said, but I'm willing to find out. Nathan squeezed her hand gently. So am I, and in the soft light of that hospital room, with a child healed, a future unfolding, and two broken pasts finally finding purpose, they took their first step. Forward. Together. Asterisk. It started with a single headline. Wall Street powerhouse abandons merger to fund shelter for single mothers. And within hours, it went viral. Nathan Langford had once lived his life above the fold CEO roundtables, billionaire rankings, television interviews where every word was rehearsed and calculated. But this was different. The media hadn't spun it as a failure. It wasn't a scandal. It was a mystery. Why would a man who built an empire on precision suddenly throw it all aside for a woman with nothing, and a baby who wasn't even his? Rachel didn't see the headlines at first. She was too busy, between hospital updates, initial interviews, with Nathan's foundation team, and reconnecting with her mother. She barely had time to breathe, and for once, the breath she took wasn't panicked, but the world had noticed her. People started sending messages, women from across the country. Some were mothers, others weren't. Some had suffered loss, others had built their own lives from pieces, but every message said the same thing. You gave me hope. It stunned her. She had never seen herself that way. She wasn't brave. She was just surviving. Still, as the days passed and Liam grew stronger, something inside her began to shift. She was no longer just reacting to the world. She was shaping it. Nathan, meanwhile, faced a very different kind of storm. His board demanded answers. The press circled like hawks. Investors were nervous. His CFO handed him a report that showed what stepping away had cost millions, maybe more. You're gambling your legacy, she warned. Nathan looked at her, calm. Maybe my legacy needed to change. Behind the calm, though, was something deeper, something he hadn't told Rachel yet. There was a contract one he'd signed nearly 2 years ago, agreeing to a merger that would give him controlling interest in a global tech giant. Back then, it had seemed like the crown jewel of his career, the final step in a life built on wins, but he'd missed the final deadline. He hadn't even read the reminders. Now, the deal had collapsed, and with it, his reputation among the elite. The old Nathan would have moved heaven and earth to salvage it, but the new Nathan was sitting in a tiny conference room at the hospital, staring at an old photo of his mother, long since gone, wondering if she'd be proud of the man he'd become. He hadn't thought of her in years. She had raised him alone, working nights as a cleaner and sleeping on buses just to save subway fare. She'd died just months before his first major acquisition. He'd buried her with a simple headstone, and then buried the memory even deeper. Now, as he watched Rachel cradle her son, he saw glimpses of her. The same quiet strength, the same fierce love. It stirred something in him he hadn't felt since childhood. That evening, after Liam fell asleep, Nathan asked Rachel if they could take a walk, just the two of them. They strolled through the quiet hospital garden, the scent of summer flowers in the air, the city skyline glowing behind the trees. I haven't told you everything, Nathan said softly. Rachel turned toward him, her expression open. What is it? He hesitated. When I walked away from that deal, it wasn't just business. It was my whole career, my future. People trusted me to finish it, and I let them down. She watched him for a long moment, then said, why are you telling me this now? Because I don't want to build anything with lies. Not the shelter, not the job I offered you, not whatever this is. Rachel's voice was gentle. And what is this, Nathan? He looked up, eyes vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. I don't know yet, but I know it matters. You matter. And not because you cried on a sidewalk or needed saving. Because you remind me who I used to be, who I could be. Rachel's heart ached not from pain, but from the weight of something real settling into place. She stepped closer. Do you think you were wrong to walk away from that deal? I think I was finally right, he whispered. They stood there for a while, the hum of the city fading into the background, and then, in the soft hush of The garden. Rachel said something that would change everything. I need to tell you something too. Nathan turned to her, brows furrowed. I wasn't always alone, she said. Liam's father, he left when I was 4 months pregnant. But he didn't just leave. He took everything with him. The rent money, my savings, even my documents. Nathan's jaw clenched. You mean he stole? I couldn't even prove who I was for months, she said, voice shaking. I had to start from nothing. I didn't tell anyone. I was ashamed and scared. Nathan reached for her hand. You're not alone anymore, he said. Not ever again. And somehow, she believed him. The walk back was quiet, peaceful, and as they entered the hospital once more, neither of them noticed the reporter sitting in the waiting room corner, snapping a photo of their clasped hands. The story was no longer just about a billionaire saving a baby. Now, the world wanted to know, was he falling in love with the mother too? The first time Liam reached for Nathan, it was quiet. No photographers, no reporters, no staged smiles. Just a tiny hand, soft and warm, wrapping around Nathan's finger with surprising strength. The moment was so small that it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else. But for Nathan Langford, a man who had held 1,000 gold-plated pens and signed deals worth more than entire city blocks, it was the most valuable grip he had ever felt. Rachel watched from the corner of the hospital room, tears welling in her eyes. Though she said nothing, she didn't have to. Everything was changing, and this time it wasn't terrifying, it was beautiful. The doctors had finally cleared Liam to go home, stronger than before, smiling, babbling, full of life. But when they placed the baby in Rachel's arms that morning, she realized something. She didn't know where home was anymore. The shelter was still under construction. Her old apartment was long gone, and the hospital, as comforting as it had strangely become, wasn't meant to hold their future. I have something to show you, Nathan said, offering her a key with a gold ribbon tied around it. Rachel stared at it. Another hospital room. He laughed softly, then shook his head. Come on, it's time. They drove for 20 minutes through the city, not toward the towers and glass where Nathan had once lived, but toward a quieter street with rows of brick buildings and shade trees. They pulled up to a modest brownstone with ivy climbing the sides and a garden gate. Rachel instantly loved. It's not mine, Nathan said. Not in the way you think. I didn't buy it to impress you. I didn't fill it with expensive furniture or hide a media team inside. I bought it because it reminded me of the place my mother always dreamed of, and because I thought maybe it could be your fresh start. Rachel stepped out slowly, cradling Liam, unsure whether to cry or simply breathe. She walked up the path, feeling the weight of years lift with every step. Inside, the air smelled like fresh paint and lemon soap. Sunlight streamed through the windows. There were toys stacked in the corner, a crib assembled with care, family photos still waiting for faces. Why are you doing this, Nathan? She asked softly. You don't owe us anything. He looked at her, and this time, his voice trembled just a little. You're right, I don't owe you, but I need you, and I want to be the kind of man Liam thinks I am when he reaches for me. That's not about debt. That's about choosing to stay. Not just for the baby, for you. Rachel didn't speak. She walked into the center of the living room, turned to face him, and finally asked the question that had haunted her since the day he stopped on that rain-soaked sidewalk. Why did you stop? Nathan blinked. What do you mean? That day, 5th Avenue. Everyone walked past me. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I saw my mother in you, he said, and I saw myself in your baby. And in that moment, everything I thought I was, everything I had built, it meant nothing compared to what I almost lost by walking away. Rachel closed the distance between them. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she lifted her hand and placed it gently on his chest. I think, she whispered, we both needed saving. We just didn't know it. A week later, the shelter opened its doors, the first of its kind in the city. Clean beds, warm meals, on-site childcare, counseling, legal aid, medical services, a place for mothers to rebuild, not just survive. Rachel became its director. She worked tirelessly, greeting each woman by name, listening to their stories, remembering every child's birthday. And Nathan, he showed up too, every week, sometimes to donate, sometimes to hold babies while the mothers took showers, and sometimes just to sit quietly with the families, as if learning from them how to live again. The media followed for a while, then moved on. But Rachel and Nathan didn't need headlines anymore. Their story was no longer about saving a child. It had become a story of second chances, not fairy tale perfect, but deeply real. On a crisp fall morning, as golden leaves danced through the air, Rachel stood on the shelter's rooftop garden, holding Liam. Nathan stood beside her, coffee in hand. "You know," he said, "if someone had told me a year ago I'd trade boardrooms for baby bottles." She laughed. "You'd have had them escorted out." He chuckled, then grew serious. "I used to believe success meant never needing anyone, but now I think real strength is knowing when you do." She turned to him, eyes soft. "So what happens next?" He looked down at Liam, then at her. "We build a life, a family, not just the three of us, but for everyone like us, the lost, the overlooked, the ones still standing in the rain." Rachel took his hand, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was reaching out in desperation. She was reaching forward into a future full of hope, purpose, and love, not because someone saved her, but because someone chose her, and that, in the end, changed everything.